Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod, Vivek Ramaswamy, former presidential candidate turned Trump campaign surrogate. We're counting down 70-odd days to the election.
You may not agree with the policies, but at least he's given them to you. And I think American voters deserve the same from Kamala Harris.
And pain at the pump may be alleviated this holiday weekend. GasBuddy's Patrick de Haan.
We expect by Labor Day another 7-cent drop or so, and it gets better. We're already tracking 7 states below $3 a gallon.
Plus, a rate hike's time has come. The grocery store merger with one heck of a shelf life, and the Boeing stumble that just may be SpaceX's opportunity.
Elon Musk has some plans for launches like 3 a week.
Oh, yeah, wild.
It's Monday, August 26th. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand by, Joe. In 3, 2, 1. His mic is here.
Good morning and welcome to Squawk Box here on CNBC, live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Joe Kernen, along with Leslie Picker and Mike Santoli. Becky and Andrew are off today. No big banks, right? You're just here.
I'm here to see you.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because normally I'm like, oh no. It's not that I'm dreading big banks, but there are a lot of really arcane, in the weeds info that you bring us with the big banks.
There are a lot of metrics.
There's a lot of them. Like,
He's not going to talk SIFI and Tier 1 and all that stuff, right?
And that's just the
CET1
beginning.
ratio.
All those.
No, we're going to save that for
And they're
October.
important. They're important.
They are.
Almost like on another morning show, like the ingredients that go into like a chicken Kiev. I don't talk about chicken. It's Kiev, isn't it?
I guess so.
Yeah.
It's chicken Kiev, but we don't mention that as much anymore. But that'd be about the most complicated thing we touch on, I think. Maybe some of Leisman once in a while starts.
I don't know. When I hear like pharma and
That's true.
semiconductors, I feel like that's complicated.
Okay.
So I guess it's all relative.
But see, that stuff's interesting. No.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, in remarks Friday at the central bank's annual confab in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, made the clearest signal yet that a rate cut is coming this year.
The time has come for policy to adjust. The direction of travel is clear, and the timing and pace of rate cuts will depend on incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
Powell didn't offer guidance on how big a cut to expect, but after the Fed's consistent march upwards on rate hikes to combat record-high inflation after the pandemic, policymakers held for more than a year the key borrowing rate, the Fed funds rate, at 5.3%, the highest level in about 2 decades. The Fed's rate-setting committee meets again in September, and Powell made it very clear that he thinks this strategy worked. Inflation has cooled, the job market has stabilized, the landing was soft. Enough, in his view. Let's get back to Joe.
Big days on Friday. Dow rallied 450 points following Fed Chairman Powell's speech. The S&P also climbing and is now less than 1% from its record high that was set in mid-July. And the NASDAQ powered ahead, adding more than 250 points on Friday. And now the attention will turn to really the leader of what we've seen in a lot of tech, NVIDIA. The AI chip maker set to report results on Wednesday after the closing bell. Stock added 4% on Friday, is now up over 160% for the year, and also near a high. We know it's a T word. Are we back?
3.2 trillion or
3.2.
Yeah.
Next stop, I guess 4.
We got 3 stocks around 3.2 at $3.3 trillion. So it's $10 trillion in the top 3 stocks.
No problem. And this is a big story today, occupying the lead article in the Wall Street Journal, lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal. Kroger and Albertsons heading to court today to defend their merger. The companies proposed what would be the largest supermarket deal in U.S. history back in 2022, saying it would help them cut costs to better compete with the real leaders in that space: Walmart, Costco, Amazon. Take your pick. The Federal Trade Commission has sued to block the merger, saying it would eliminate competition and raise grocery prices. But it was pointed out at the time to make it so narrow in how you're testing Whether there would be antitrust concerns, has a lot of people pointing to. This is almost one of the poster childs for maybe overreach for Lina Khan and her FTC at this point.
Look, they don't like horizontal deals. Remember that a judge blocked Staples Office Depot? I mean, kind of a dying business.
Didn't they block SiriusXM for a while, too?
Yes, exactly. And so it almost as if it has to get to a point where the overall market is so big relative to the two competitors that it's redefined the market, right? SiriusXM, I mean, once streaming came around, it was no longer dominant.
But it is possible that this action has the opposite of what's intended in the effect on prices for consumers.
You never know, yeah. I mean, look, they also haven't done that well in court, the government sometimes with these cases. So
it doesn't stop them from trying, though.
There are a lot of think pieces this morning on the CNS and kind of what that means, because part of the deal has this remedy whereby they would sell 579 stores.
To a company no one's ever heard of.
Yeah. It's a company nobody's ever heard of. They own Piggly Wiggly and I guess a few other ones, and they're part of the distribution aspect
I like
of
kind of
grocery.
we're going to the Piggly Wiggly.
I like that too.
They go to Wawa.
It sounds
it's
better
next to the
than
Wawa and the Piggly Wiggly.
I know.
CNS.
And so
I hear that.
But they said that,
what do you think when you hear CNS?
I think of probably like a software company or like a consulting firm.
Central nervous system. You don't think of that immediately?
No.
I think Mike did. What?
I really didn't. No.
CNS?
I mean, I see it now, but
it's my background.
It didn't immediately.
It's immediately thought of it. It's immediately thought. That's what it stands for.
I mean, I'm going back to ninth grade bio for that.
Yeah, same. Or college.
Is that where you stopped?
More or less, yeah.
More news on the struggle to sell Paramount Global. Edgar Bronfman reportedly has plans for the studio, including a partnership with a tech giant such as Amazon or Apple to improve its streaming service. Bronfman put in a last-minute bid for control of Paramount last week. Bloomberg reports Bronfman believes Paramount needs more specific skills in terms of ad sales, licensing, and growing its customer base. This has just been such a whirlwind. I believe that the special committee meets on the 28th, so in 2 days, to discuss whether this is a superior bid or not. But I mean, it's just like.
Well, and Skydance saying that even considering this bid or extending the period, it was breach of contract.
Yep.
It's kind of messy. By the way, nobody's raising enough money to buy the whole company.
No.
This is all what it all comes down to. Well, we're going to take out this piece of the control shareholder, and so public shareholders are kind of not sure.
Yeah, and this one reportedly has Fortress as one of the backers too, which has some foreign ownership implications because it's owned, not majority, right? Isn't it like 40% by
Fortress? Yeah, I don't know.
UAE or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely one to watch.
This just makes me nervous, and the whole story makes me nervous. Then we'll talk about Polaris, which is happening tonight, but Godspeed to these people. They're still so brave. The two astronauts are stranded on the International Space Station and will be coming home now, not until early 2025. And at this point, they're getting a ride from Elon Musk. NASA decided that Boeing's Starliner capsule will return empty from the station after bringing the pair up there in June. The test flight was originally intended for just 9 days. And this marks a dramatic about-face for NASA and Boeing, as the organizations were previously adamant that the capsule was the primary choice for returning the crew. But Starliner's crew flight, the test faced problems, most notably with the propulsion system and helium, and you wanted everything to be exactly right before you try it. The astronauts are now expected to return to Earth in February on SpaceX's Dragon capsule. Shares of Boeing are lower this morning. The morale at that company is supposedly taking another hit, down more than 33%. And then tonight at 3:38 a.m., we're supposed to get this Polaris launch, where it'll be the first commercial spacewalk. They want to scale the spacesuits as well to test that. That was one of the problems. Compatibility with spacesuits, one of the problems. For why it wasn't going to be, where they weren't going to come home with SpaceX. But these guys, I don't know if you read their names. One guy's nickname is Kid, and another one was, they're like test pilots. And they're people that are really different from, I don't know about you, but totally different from me. Pilot Scott Kidd Poteet, retired U.S. Air Force lieutenant who flew with the Thunderbirds. Mission specialist Sarah Gillis, she's an engineer, operations engineer. And I don't want to worry. I don't want to worry because they're really good at this now. I understand that, but I can't help but worry
No,
Can't
I
help but
would
be anxious.
Not
want everything to
one
work.
part of it appeals to me. The idea of going or taking that
No.
risk. Although maybe if you know that much about it, if you're an engineer and you're like, well, we know how these things work and it's not a problem.
I'm just glad they have enough food. They were supposed to be there for 8 days?
Well, the other ones, we're talking about the ones that are going up.
the
they're going up.
spacewalkers and stuff.
The highest spacewalk ever.
Yeah.
Right?
Have you seen the show For All Mankind?
Once you're certain height.
Yeah.
altitude,
No. I wonder if. Oh my God, this is even. Whoa, that looks even further
Yes.
away.
For All Mankind on Apple? You know what I was going to say?
The Apple show.
Have either of you seen
I
this?
haven't seen that.
So they kind of come up with it's basically if the U.S. hadn't won the space race.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of
Alternative history.
they would have kept up the space program, and so they have all of these things that seem crazy for that happen to astronauts up in space, and then you read headlines like these and you think, well, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
I don't have it in front of me, but Elon Musk has some plans for launches like 3 a week or something. Because it used to be like a lot of things always seems like they had to go right. And I don't even want to think about the O-rings or any of those. I mean, it just seems like in a normal commercial flight, you can only have one mistake every 9 billion times or something. I don't know what it takes for this to be perfect, but good luck tonight.
Absolutely. All right, coming
Tomorrow
up.
morning, actually.
Yeah.
Tease will be next.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, Trump campaign surrogate and former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He's weighing in on Democratic nominee Kamala Harris and her economic agenda so far.
If you don't want your opponent to tag you as a communist, then maybe your first policy should not be a bunch of price controls.
Welcome back to Squawk Pod. This next conversation is with a one-time White House hopeful and now a Donald Trump campaign surrogate, Vivek Ramaswamy, an entrepreneur and financier turned presidential candidate in the 2024 primaries, who, like many on the right side of the aisle these last few weeks, takes issue with the hot-button idea of price controls on consumer goods. And to set this up, let's flash back to a discussion Joe had with Senator Elizabeth Warren on Friday. You can find that in our last podcast before this one.
Look at the Washington Post, and if you lose the Washington Post as a Democrat, you got some serious problems. This is what they said about the price gouging or the price control legislation. It was really pilloried from both sides of the aisle. Even Jason Furman, I don't know if you saw some of his comments. He said it's not good policy, and it could actually do more harm than good. And I can paint you a picture of how that would work and how it's worked in the past, where we've tried to artificially hold prices down. Competition doesn't come in. People don't, like if beef is too high, people don't move the chicken. The competitors don't come in to undercut where the beef prices are. Nothing works when you try to artificially control prices. It's just a supply and demand issue. It's a flawed idea.
So did you have a question here?
Yes. Why would you propose a flawed idea when the real problem,
So let me
if you
ask
really
the
want to help
question.
the middle class, if you really sincerely want to help people having trouble at the grocery store, it's not price gouging that's the issue. And if you look at it seriously and really want to help them, then let's do something about it together. Fine.
I understand if you want to do a lecture about this, but let's just start with where have you been for the last 30 years as 36 states have price gouging laws, and they have used them effectively.
Senator Elizabeth Warren on Squawk Box last week, sharing her thoughts on price controls. Our next guest says enacting price controls is a terrible idea. Joining us now, Trump campaign surrogate, former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Got a big head start in life from those crazy Jesuits, I think, but from the salt of the earth, from Cincinnati, but from the good side of town, right? Vivek, were you on the east side?
Right.
Were you on the east side of town?
Grew up on the east side of I-75, that's right.
Yeah, that figures. I'm over in Pete Rose country, over near the west side of town, but it's good to have you on. Been a while. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We don't know a lot about the Harris-Walz economic plan, but it's been trickling out, and it's almost to a free market person or I guess a classic conservative, it's like watching A Clockwork Orange. I'm like this, Vivek, watching what's coming out, whether it's raising the rate on corporate taxes or going up the 45%, close to, on capital gains for certain individuals. It's a lot of populism, but most people that defend it say, she doesn't really mean it. It'll never happen.
Yeah, so that's the irony here, Joe. And first of all, I agree with my friends at the Washington Post who observed that if you don't want your opponent to tag you as a communist, then maybe your first policy should not be a bunch of price controls in the United States. We've seen price controls fail in every other major country that's tried it. Argentina, Venezuela, under Hugo Chavez, under Nicolas Maduro. The irony in Venezuela is that you actually saw undernourishment increase tenfold over the same period where they enacted price controls in the food industry, in the grocery industry. Yet that's exactly what they've proposed here. And I do think that the fact that this was her signature economic unveiling says a lot about where her vision actually is. To borrow Tim Walz's expression, Joe, if I may, it is just plain weird for them to focus even on the grocery sector if they were going to implement price controls, because this is a sector in which you look at the profit margins of Kroger or Albertsons. You're looking at 2%, 1% profit margins. I saw that interview that Elizabeth Warren did with you, and I respectfully disagree with her. But she even brought up examples like Kraft Heinz or Cal-Maine. The reality is their profit margins are lower today than they were in 2015 to 2016. So yes, it is a just plain weird fixation. And the reality is, look at the defense of her policies. What you hear across the board is, it's not going to pass, don't worry about it. If it's the price controls, don't worry, Congress won't pass it. If it's abolishing private health insurance or banning fracking, which she's supported before, don't worry, it just won't pass. If it is the tax on unrealized capital gains, which everybody understands is going to be a disaster, what they whisper back is, don't worry, it just won't pass. And so the irony of this is that even the left-wing intelligentsia aren't defending the merits of her actual policies. All they're arguing to the public is that the reality is they will never be enacted into law. And I think that says a lot about the actual commitments of the Harris-Walz campaign.
Both sides, I guess, do it a little bit, Vivek. And I think we're going to have Jason Furman on a little bit later. I guess people don't really believe, but even, did you see the New York Times today? I thought this was funny. I guess Vice President Harris really did grow up in Berkeley. That's where her address is. It's in Berkeley. So during the speech, it was, I grew up on the Bay. I grew up in Oakland. I grew up, east of San. Never, so not saying Berkeley anymore at this point. And I guess, and not saying that her father would have informed her opinions on anything, but no longer a Marxist economist. What was he? He's a post-Keynesian economist that has some Kaleckian and neo-Ricardian influences, but no longer a Marxist. So it's being, a lot of this, we're supposed to think that our original opinion is not what is actually the case. And it's worked pretty well for the past 30 days, Vivek. You got to admit.
Yeah, look, I think the PR has worked outstandingly for them over the last 30 days. The question is whether it can last through the election. For my part, Joe, I'm never going to hold somebody's father's views against them or where they grew up against them. What I hold against Kamala Harris is her own stated policy convictions. When she ran for U.S. president just 4 years ago, said she wanted to abolish private health insurance. That means anybody who's watching this, who likes their private health insurance today,
I think all those she's backed off on all. Taken away. I'm reading it. She's backed off on all those. But how would we know? And I asked Mike Allen about this, for the mainstream media to not have insisted on answering some extemporaneous questions, not from a teleprompter, this far into the candidacy is mind-boggling, and it can only be a mainstream media that's complicit in trying to help her.
Look, I think the mainstream media covered for Joe Biden's cognitive deficits for 3 years in much the same way that at least many are covering so far for Kamala Harris's policy deficits. But the reason we're having this conversation is I hope that changes. I think the American voters deserve better, whether you might agree with Donald Trump's policies or not, but at least he's given you clear policies from everything from digital assets to cryptocurrency to healthcare that he would abolish or at least repeal and replace Obamacare, to look at what tariffs he would apply in particular parts of the world, how to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You may not agree with the policies, but at least he's given them to you. And I think American voters deserve the same from Kamala Harris. The other thing I'll say, Joe, is that have Republicans been perfect on issues like price controls? No, they haven't. A lot of this came up not only under Carter, but also under Nixon. Even in recent years, you've seen some Republicans favoring price controls in different areas. So I'm not going to be some partisan hack here. But the reality is, if you compare the Democrats to the Republicans, it's not even close which one is actually taking the Venezuelan-style approach to controlling the economy. And the irony is that's going to be worse for even the very people they purport to serve when those supply shortages come in, when those black markets emerge, when you have a tax on unrealized capital gains that triggers a stock market crash and an asset price crash that hurts the people at the bottom the
Vivek,
most. So that's the reality.
That's what I started with Senator Warren about that. I go, let's talk, brass tacks about how we can help with inflation instead of, but this was on the same day that I did see a journal piece that talked about the foot soldiers of the Democratic Party are all fired up about price control. It just continues the same sort of anti-corporate rhetoric that we saw, greedy corporations. And we heard that again and again and again from the Biden administration. But it fires up the base. But what scares me, Vivek, and I think Ronald Reagan said it, that every generation needs to learn this new, that you end up, eating your pets if you go down the path to socialism. There's enough young people that don't know that right now where this she could easily get elected, Vivek.
So the reality is, of course, she can easily get elected. This is going to be a tight race through the very end. But the reality is this could be good for Americans if we're able to have that policy debate, Joe. If this election is fought on personality, I think the American public loses as a result. When Tim Walz and Kamala Harris have made it their signature campaign slogan and vision to call Donald Trump and 70+ million Americans who support him just plain weird, I think that divides us in the end, rather than offering an actual alternative policy vision. They haven't done that. I think it's up to the media to hold them accountable. If the media doesn't do it, then I think Republicans need to bring Kamala Harris's own policy prescriptions to the fore. When she ran for U.S. president, when she's proposed budgets, including a 25% tax on unrealized gains, when she has co-sponsored legislation with Bernie Sanders for Medicare for all, single-payer health care, when she has co-sponsored the Green New Deal legislation that would abolish the coal industry, that they said they would eliminate the filibuster to pass through. That's the kind of policy debate we deserve to be having. And for those who say we want to defend our democracy, part of our democracy is actually having those open policy debates that at least so far in this race, and it's only about 30 days since she's been the presumptive nominee, but so far in those 30 days, we have not yet been having, and I, for my part, not as a Republican or Democrat, but as an American, want to see that change because that's how voters are best served. So I challenge Kamala Harris to actually defend not just slogans like mind your own damn business, right? You hear that from Tim Walz. My view is the government should mind its own damn business when it comes to taking gas stoves, when it comes to intervening in the grocery market for price control measurements or taxing unrealized gains. Let's have that debate in the open, and the country's going to be better off for it.
Vivek, former President Trump said, we will target everything from car affordability to housing affordability to insurance costs to supply chain issues to the price of prescription drugs. I will instruct my cabinet that I expect results within the first 100 days or sooner than that. What is that as an actual plan?
So, look, one of the things that President Trump has been clear about, it's near and dear to my heart as well, is taming the regulatory state. Cut down the scope days? Of. I believe so, actually. You want to know why? Because we have a Supreme Court in the last 2 years that has given us history-making decisions, overturning Chevron deference and West Virginia versus EPA, which I believe is the most important Supreme Court case of our lifetime in 2022, with the major questions doctrine, basically said that if Congress did not pass this through the front door, then a regulation that deals with the major policy question is unconstitutional. That is seismic in its scope. Trump did not have that at his back in 2016 and 2017. So when you're talking about a new administration and taming the regulatory state, the Supreme Court has provided the toolkit to do it. All we need is a president and an administration that is willing to wield it. So in 100 days, frankly, I'd like to see it in less than that. Executive
but I thought that it was demand-side fiscal
policy
policy that caused the inflation, not regulations.
I think there's a range of
story.
facts. So it's not just inflation. When you look at actually the fact that prices have gone up at a faster rate than wages have, that's really the gap that Americans are left hurting for. When it relates to inflation, let's talk about energy abundance. Drill, frack, burn coal, use nuclear energy. A lot of that is constrained through the permitting process in the Department of Interior, as you well know. That is the regulatory state. When you look at permits for refineries, permits for drilling, or even offshore drilling, which Kamala Harris has previously favored a ban on, The reality is that is the regulatory state
And yet
getting in the way.
we're at record domestic oil production. But yes,
when prices are high, that's when you
inclusive, as you will well know, of course, inclusive of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is operating at the lowest level that it possibly has.
Weekly production, oil field production at a record high.
Well,
now it is in the election year
a barrel,
versus the 3 years that led us here, as I know you well know. But the reality is, to your point, does the regulatory state play a role in giving us supply shortages? Absolutely, it does. And can that be addressed? Yes, it can. The question is the president willing to do it? I believe Donald Trump is. For Kamala Harris, I believe the answer is no.
What about the FTC with regard to the regulatory state? I know we can debate the merits of price controls, but does the Trump camp believe that prices are too high for American consumers? And if so, is anti-competitive and ensuring kind of anti-monopolistic behavior part of the Trump campaign's platform to bring those prices down?
So look, this is one of the beauties of the current Republican Party is we do have what you'd call a big tent on this issue. I'll give you my own perspective is I think empowering those three-letter agencies, including the FTC, including with vaguely defined mandates like what Kamala Harris has proposed with respect to the price gouging proposal in the grocery market, is a mistake. I don't think giving further authority to Lina Khan to decide what does or does not count as fair competition is a particularly pro-American thing to do. Competition is generally the way. You look at segments like the grocery market, which is fragmented, which is competitive. We don't need the FTC empowered with further authority. And I'm consistent in my view on that. I think that we have over-empowered three-letter agencies across the board. I think our founding fathers never envisioned it. It wasn't that way for most of our national history. And I think the right step is with it, whether it's respect to the FTC or any other three-letter agency, to actually constrain the scope of what they're able to do. And if the American people want to impinge industry, fine. Let them do it through the front door of Congress in the way that our Constitution actually ordained, not through backdoor rulemaking written by people who were never elected to actually make those rules in the first place. That's the way I see it.
Vivek, great. Good to have you on this morning. Hopefully it won't be so long till next time we see each other. Good to have you on. See you later.
Continue the conversation. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Up next on Squawk Pod, the road to Labor Day is paved with cheaper gas. GasBuddy's head of analysis, Patrick de Haan, on prices at the pump and demand despite electric's rise.
Americans like the reliability of having a vehicle that they can both run on battery power for a certain amount of miles and also then have the reliance of the massive fuel network, the 150,000 gas stations across the country.
You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC, today with Joe Kernen, Mike Santoli, and Leslie Picker. Here's Leslie.
According to GasBuddy Labor Day travel forecast, gas prices are expected to fall to $3.27 per gallon this holiday weekend, or lower in some regions of the country. That's down 13% from a year ago and the lowest Labor Day price since 2021. Joining us now, Patrick de Haan, GasBuddy, head of petroleum analysis. Patrick, thank you for being here. So what do you attribute these declines to? Is it weather? Is it geopolitics? I mean, why are we seeing a bit of relief this year?
Well, kind of a little bit of all of the above. We haven't seen heat waves, which last year knocked out refineries, especially on the West Coast and the Corn Belt. That happened going into Labor Day. That's why last year's national average was nearly 50 cents a gallon higher than this year, as well as falling oil prices. Now, some of that can be blamed on the slowdown in the economy. The U.S. and China both not seeing as much oil demand and gasoline demand compared to last year. And so that breathing room has provided the room for gas prices to decline. And it's going to get better here as we get into Labor Day. Prices are continuing to drop. We expect by Labor Day another 7-cent drop or so. And it gets better. We're already tracking 7 states below $3 a gallon, and 20% of the nation's gas stations already reporting a price below $3. And those numbers will continue to rise as we get into the fall.
I'm curious about the interplay between consumer behavior with regard to EVs and gas demand. And I ask because you've got Ford and GM recently kind of recalibrating their EV ambitions. And largely that's due to just consumer behavior and the decision by a lot of consumers to opt for a hybrid or just a traditional type of car. How do you think gas prices play a role there? And what does that mean for demand for gas if we are seeing such a large-scale recalibration relative to what we were expecting?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something we're talking about here at this convention is all of that talk about manufacturers that are moving back to hybrids kind of away from some of those EVs. Americans in some areas just not quite ready. And with lower energy prices, Americans like the reliability of having a vehicle that they can both run on battery power for a certain amount of miles and also then have the reliance of the massive fuel network, the 150,000 gas stations across the country. That's part of the conversation that is limiting somewhat the return of gasoline demand to pre-pandemic levels. But that's certainly something that Americans are looking more at, that is hybrids rather than full-on electric vehicles. And we're seeing manufacturers certainly result or change to pivot to that result that Americans are looking for more of those mild hybrids.
I would say actually I never thought about that, Patrick. What would you call it? VoltBuddy.com, electric, and you. I'm glad for you that it's
I think you've got a lot of great ideas there, I think
Volt
you're definitely onto something.
If you're looking at actually electricity prices. I couldn't help but think, though, Patrick, it's a beautiful system, isn't it, the way the dynamics of supply and demand kind of override everything else? I mean, if these companies decided $5 a gallon gas would be awesome.
Yeah.
They can't do it. You can't do it. You can't put it at $5. We don't need controls. Things happen based on supply and demand. Do they not?
I love that this is a supply and demand story. And you know what? We're going to hear more of it getting closer to the election. We're going to have finger pointing. But at the end of the day, it's all about global supply and demand, not just in the U.S. The U.S. certainly one of the bigger stories, and China. But this is good old Econ 101.
Volt Buddy. What Amp Buddy? What do you think it should be?
I think Fuel Buddy still kind of covers
Fuel
everything.
Buddy still,
it?
not really. If you're plugging it in, not really.
These are some great ideas.
These are.
Power Buddy.
Power Buddy. I like that.
Power Pal.
You know what? I think you have some time.
Power Pal, if you go with
that. Good news is I think you got some.
I'll be listening to all the ideas.
This will serve as.
I think you got some time before everyone. Well, they built 2 charging stations, I think, with the IRA money, didn't they? How many? Are they working on 3?
I haven't tracked it.
Yeah. Well, I like Power Pal with Patrick because it's got a nice alliteration there.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you,
I like
Patrick.
that one too.
That's the pod for today. Thanks for joining us and for starting your week with us here. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Big thanks to Leslie and Mike for sitting in today. You can tune in any day to Squawk Box on TV. We're on weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern. Get the smartest takes and analysis from our 3-hour morning show right into your ears in an easy-to-listen-to format when you follow Squawk Pod. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, really wherever you like to listen. And that's it. Have a great Monday. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.